It's that time again. Let's do a scenario. Hey, welcome to another episode of Licensure Lifeline. This is your host, Matt Lawson, and today we're going to go over a scenario related to some ethics that we spoke about in the last episode. Just as a reminder, check us out on Instagram, where I will be posting some flashcards, and I am also in the process of creating an Etsy store that will have some study questions, study guides, and some other things that could potentially be helpful for you on the test. Okay, let's get into the scenario. You are a licensed counselor in private practice. One of your clients, Sarah, has been attending therapy for months to address anxiety and relationship issues. During your most recent session, she disclosed that she is considering ending her relationship with her partner, but feels pressure from her family obligations to stay. Sarah also mentioned that her brother has been struggling with substance use issues, and she asked if you could offer him counseling. Sarah feels confident that you could help her brother due to the process she's made in the progress that she has made in therapy. You must navigate the ethical considerations of Sarah's request while maintaining professional boundaries. Okay, let's pick this apart a bit. First up, dual relationship. I think that's one of the first areas that you're probably going to really go into for consideration around ethics on a scenario like this. The fact that Sarah's asking to see her brother raises some concerns here, right? This is going to be a dual relationship, and it's important to really gather more information about whether counseling for Sarah and her brother could impact your ability to maintain objectivity. The key here is to really understand what is best for the individual. Now, there is nothing that is cut and dry here when it comes to dual relationships. There are definitely situations where dual relationships are appropriate. I've actually, in my therapy practice, I've had dual relationships with clients that I've worked with, but you really need to figure out what is best for the individual that you are working with. In my case, I was definitely the best choice for some people that I worked with because of my background and because of my availability. There might be a scenario where you are maybe working in a really small town and people just don't have as much access to therapy. So you might end up in a couple of dual relationships. But in this case, you really need to evaluate if a dual relationship is going to be best for Sarah and her brother. Will you be able to maintain professionalism? Will you be able to maintain boundaries? Which brings us to the next area, confidentiality. Can you ethically maintain confidentiality for Sarah while navigating her request for her brother, right? Like, you're not going to be talking about Sarah to her brother in his sessions if you did see them, and you want to make sure you're not talking to her brother about Sarah in those sessions either. But even with that, like, even hints of, how do you navigate a situation where Sarah wants to talk about her brother, and her brother wants to talk about the impact that Sarah has on his relationship to alcohol. So there's a lot of considerations here when it comes to confidentiality and dual relationship. Another thing to really consider is, do you have referral options in this situation? Sarah likes the work that she's been doing with you. She's had some positive outcomes already. She sees you as her best option because she potentially doesn't know of anybody else. But you should have a nice referral network, and maybe can even talk to her about like referring to somebody else. And this gives you another option that, again, will not compromise your relationship with Sarah and compromise that sense of having that dual relationship. So pretty cut and dry for the most part. Like I said, you really should evaluate dual relationship on a case-by-case basis. But the things I mentioned here, confidentiality and referral options, should also give you some space to make some other decisions if they are warranted. If you feel like the relationship to Sarah is going to be negatively impacted, or if you feel that you will not be able to support her brother in the way that he needs as well. So let's go over some questions that might come from a scenario like this. So first question, Sarah has requested that you see her brother for counseling. What is your best course of action to maintain ethical boundaries? Would it be A, accept her brother as a client as long as you clarify boundaries? B, accept her brother as a client but avoid discussing Sarah's therapy with him. C, refer her brother to another therapist to avoid dual relationships. Or D, discuss with Sarah how to navigate confidentiality concerns. The answer to this is going to be C. So refer her brother to another therapist to avoid dual relationships. And particularly within family systems, this can be dual relationships or a relationship like this at all can be pretty complicated and complicate the therapeutic process. So you want to maintain boundaries and you want to be really clear that referring her brother to another therapist is the best course of action. Question number 2. What ethical principle is primarily at risk if you accept both Sarah and her brother as clients? Autonomy, competency, confidentiality, or non-maleficence? Answer here is going to be C, confidentiality. Confidentiality would be difficult to maintain with this scenario because seeing two related clients may create a situation where Sarah or her brother expect the counselor to share information between them. This could potentially create ethical dilemmas around confidentiality. Question number 3. Sarah has asked you to help her brother with substance use issues. What ethical guidelines must be considered before providing counseling services to him? Fidelity, A, justice, B, non-maleficence, C, or competency, D. The answer here is going to be competency. Before accepting any new client, it's important to ensure that you have the necessary competencies to treat this individual. If you don't even specialize in substance use treatment, it may be more ethical to refer her brother to a therapist. Remember, you were seeing Sarah for anxiety and relationship issues, so that actually might be your area of specialization. If you don't have substance use background, it doesn't make sense to see your brother. Last question. How should you respond if Sarah begins discussing details about her brother's substance use in therapy? A, listen without comment to avoid breaking confidentiality. B, gently redirect Sarah to focus on her own therapy goals. C, inform Sarah that you cannot discuss her brother unless he gives consent. Or D, take detailed notes in case her brother becomes your client. The answer to this is going to be B, gently redirect Sarah to focus on her own therapy goals. So redirecting Sarah back to her own therapy maintains integrity of her treatment, which you want to focus on. Some people may talk about other individuals as a way to deflect from their own problems. So you want to make sure that you're kind of coming back around to this place. And if you think about it, you are potentially considering taking on her brother as a client, and you don't want necessarily in-depth background on him before you start working from Sarah. You really want the information from her brother. Okay, before I end this episode, I want to go over the ethical decision-making model that the ACA has. So this model helps counselors approach dilemmas similar to the one that we went over in this scenario. And basically it's broken down in this way. Identify the problem, review relevant guidelines from the ACA Code of Ethics, consult with a supervisor or colleague, generate possible courses of action, evaluate the consequences of the situation, and implement and document the decision. So let me expand on this just a bit more. Identifying the problem, right? It's pretty straightforward. What issue are you dealing with in this situation? Is it dual relationship? Is it confidentiality? Is it competency? In this scenario in particular, we're looking at dual relationship. Next, according to this model, you would then consider the code of ethics that the ACA puts out. So, it has different sections in here, like section A.5.D talks specifically about avoiding dual relationship and gives more background on here. I've maybe looked at the actual code of ethics a handful of times in the entire time I've been a therapist, and it wasn't really as a reference. It was more out of curiosity. It's good to have some knowledge that this even exists. A lot of this information is online too. It makes it really easy to look the information up, but it's a pretty good go-to if you ever have any questions. But most of the time, you're probably going to be asking a supervisor or a colleague about this info. Next, you really want to determine the nature and dimension of the dilemma. Here you would really look at what the situation is, the potential harm it's going to cause, any cultural factors that you should consider, any personal bias that might come up for you. So really analyze the situation and figure out like what the dilemma is based on the problem that you have. Next, you should generate a potential course of action. And come up with a couple of different things here. Should you refer her brother out? Should you continuing counseling with Sarah only, and just straight up decline the request to see her brother, which wouldn't be very nice. At minimum, you should be able to give referrals. See both Sarah and her brother. That's still an option as well after you consider it. Um, Maybe it would just be best to just consult with a colleague or supervisor and discuss the ethical dilemma just to get an outside perspective. After you come up with these different courses of action, then you need to really consider the consequences of each of those options. What's referring going to do versus seeing both Sarah and her brother at the same time? And again, like really considering the impact it's going to have on the individuals that you're considering working with. So this should really get you to a place where you can select a course of action, and you want to then evaluate that course of action to figure out what's going to be best. So if you decide to refer her brother out, does this protect, Sarah's confidentiality and autonomy? Yes. Does it maintain clear boundaries to avoid dual relationship? Yes. Does it align with the ACA Code of Ethics? Yeah, Code of Ethics. Yes. So an evaluation at this point would be appropriate. From there, you're going to implement the course of action and then just kind of reflect on the outcome. Reflecting on the outcome might be a good thing to do with a supervisor. Again, just getting some outside perspective. And again, throughout this course, you might want to have that supervisor with you. And then from the reflection of the outcome, you also want to make sure you document things. So much of this world, our therapy world, needs to be documented and the decisions understood as to why you came to them. All right, that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, keep learning.